Hi, everyone. It's Harris Rosen again, and I'm the co-founder of CareerPathIntelligence.com. And our mandate is to showcase purpose-driven careers to students. And we want to empower the next generation of students to change the world and to show them that a few committed people really can change the world. And on that note, I can think of few people who have had as positive an impact on planet Earth as Sebastiano Cossia Castiglioni. And what a great privilege to be here with Sebastiano. I'm also joined by trailblazing animal welfare lawyer Jennifer Friedman, who has graciously agreed to co-moderate this session with me. Now, full disclosure, Jennifer is also my wife, and we have never done a podcast together, so I'm a little bit nervous, both because I'm in the presence of Sebastiano and of course, because I'm doing a podcast, my first, with my wife. You can read Sebastiano's bio on our site, but he's done so much. You really have, Sebastiano, and it's worthy of sharing a few highlights with our listeners. So first and foremost, Sebastiano is an entrepreneur, he's an investor, he's an activist, he's an advisor to business, to government, to nonprofits around the world. He was even an advisor to Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi from 2014 to 2016. He is the owner and honorary chairman of Quercia Bella, which I think means oak tree, Sebastiano?
Yes, Quercia Bella is how you pronounce it, and it's beautiful oak tree.
Beautiful oak tree. So Quercia Bella Biodynamic Vineyard in beautiful Tuscany, Italy. He is also the chairman of global M&A firm NKGB, and Vegan Capital. He's also a partner in Dismatrix and Blue Horizon Group. And for our listeners out there, for you students, these are companies, many of you already know this, many of you don't. These are companies which are at the forefront of food security, health, sustainability, animal welfare, and animal rights. Sebastiano is doing wonderful things in the world. And among the brands, Sebastiano, that you invest in, I know I'm going to miss quite a few, so forgive me, but Matthew Kenney Cuisine, Lighter, Plantable, the Vurger Company, Barvecue. You were an early investor in that little company, that little acorn turned, right, Beyond Meat. We love Beyond Meat. You know, we eat it every other day. So I want to welcome you and really thank you for making yourself available to us. How are you both this morning?
Wonderfully well. And Jennifer and Harris, thank you so much for having me. And it's my great honor to be with you. And because we're talking to students, you're talking to young people today, what I find very important is always to find mentors and to find good examples to study and follow. And Jennifer Friedman is undoubtedly one of my heroes. She has worked in her job as prosecutor, prosecuting cases against animal abusers. I cannot imagine anything more important and fundamental to change society and bring it into the right direction than what you have done, Jennifer. So thank you so much for that. I'm blown away by what you've done and what you're doing.
I truly appreciate your kind comments. It's really an honor to participate with you today. So thank you so much.
We are so humbled, Sebastiano. And so this format is called 20 Questions with Sebastiano. So I'm going to dive right in. And the first question is a rather brazen question, Sebastiano, but I'm going to ask it anyway because, and you'll know why I'm asking it. I would have thought that in traditional Italy, in beautiful Italy, which is steeped in tradition, that to do what you have done and deviate from tradition, that they would have arrested you at some point. Did you have a lot of formidable opposition?
You know, I'm used to innovate, and I'm not afraid of going against the mainstream. I always do. I always did. And when we decided to take our winery onto the organic path in 1988 and then biodynamic in 2000, yes, we were pioneers. We were not the first to do biodynamic, but we were the first to do it at that level. But, you know, there's always opposition. There's always misunderstanding. I don't care. We do what we need to do. And, you know, eventually people do understand. It might take decades, but you know, they get there.
That's amazing.
You've been quoted as saying, quote, "We should work with nature, not against it," end of quote. Explain what that means, please.
Oh, thank you for reminding me that. Yeah, I think it makes sense in every possible way. Nature is amazing in terms of what it gives back to you when you work with it. So respecting it. So any human activity should take that element into consideration. And not only because it allows you to protect, preserve, and enrich the planet when you do so, but also because it makes sense from every other standpoint. So we now know that investing with nature and protecting nature makes sense long-term. We're seeing the failure of all the industries that destroy nature. And so harmony with nature is fundamental. And I just want to give you one very simple example. In biodynamics, which is what we practice at Querciabella in our vineyards, you encourage wildlife and nature around you to be part of the system. So you don't destroy nature, you actually bring it into the fields. We plant 30 to 36 varieties of plants in the middle of the vineyards to create a small ecosystem. And there was a study done that showed that you have almost 200 times the varieties of species, animal species that you have in your fields than you would have if you practice conventional agriculture. That tells a lot. You know, you're basically bringing nature into what you do, respecting it, and working with it.
And on that note, I understand you transitioned decades ago to a plant-based diet and lifestyle. Why is the plant-based movement so important and meaningful to you?
Well, I became a vegetarian when I was 15 because I received some literature about animal experimentation, started reading about it overnight, became a vegetarian and an animal rights activist, which I am to this day. And later on, you know, information was not so widely and easily available. Later on, I became a vegan when I understood the full spectrum of things. But that is really the key and what informs all of my activities. Since that day, when I started reading about how animals are mistreated and abused around the world, it just changed my entire life. And I've been working for the animals in every possible way. So by being an activist, I still am. I'm part of several organizations and I work actively in many sectors. I'd love to mention at least Sea Shepherd, which is an organization that I've worked with for over a decade. And then now it's probably 15 years or so, you know, time flies. But it is very important because I think that we cannot ignore the amount of suffering that goes on behind closed doors most of the time that animals are the victims of, and just go on with our lives. And it is as fundamental as it is to me to every day fight against child abuse, and it is as important to me as it is fighting every day against abuse against women, because you cannot be a moral person if you just plainly ignore the things that are wrong and that happen right next to you. So I believe every morning when I wake up, I know that I'm going to fight another day for all these causes that are all interconnected, as we know, and all very important.
Sebastiano, just piggybacking on your comments and in looking at some of your past interviews, it dawned on me that maybe one of your most glaring accomplishments is the work that you do in countries like Senegal for women's rights and anti-poaching. And so God bless you for doing that. That's truly, you know, it's to say that you're going against the grain and that's an uphill battle. It always is, right?
Absolutely, but it's also much more interesting because of that, right? I was raised by parents who taught me that being different is not an issue, it's not a problem, it's actually a virtue, and I've lived by that.
That's great. So that segues nicely into my next question, and you've done so many things. So you've invested in real estate, the finance sector, fine art, the food and beverage industry, the biomedical sector. It's honestly hard to follow. You've got so many accomplishments here. And you even, I think you even have you were the force or one of the forces behind Beyond Meat. But why should individuals simply not invest in what is profitable? Why not, you know, I'll give an obvious example. Why not a poison gas factory if it's profitable? I mean, you know, many investors are quite cold and dispassionate about what they invest in.
It is an excellent question. Now, traditionally, investments in so-called impact have been money-losing investments. In the past few decades, there were funds, you know, started with the right principle about water resources or, you know, many other things that just failed, but because they were conceived the wrong way. We now know as a fact, these are statistics that appeared in the past few weeks and days even. We now know as a fact that globally, ESG compliant companies have better returns than companies that damage the environment. These are plain numbers. There's no discussion. Overall, both in the public market and in private investments, when you work with the environment and for the environment and taking into consideration the important question of sustainability, you make more money. It's a fact. And I would do it anyway. And there are intelligent ways to go about it so that it's profitable at the same time as being virtuous. But now you don't even have to wonder. I mean, if you invest in good companies that are, you know, we say ESG compliant, but it doesn't matter. I mean, the true point is that they're working with a true sustainable platform and framework. If you do that, you will have better returns. Let me also say that it's also true that if you invest against sustainability, you will suffer, as it's demonstrated in the past few weeks by the fate of the meat industry and the dairy industry. So you take a crisis that no one could expect, COVID, and you see what happens. And guess what? Oat milk is selling 6 times as much as it was in the previous weeks. And the meat industry is seeing the first drop in decades, serious drop in consumption, not to mention the enormous financial damage that they will suffer because of how unsustainable they are anyway. And the dairy industry started going bankrupt before COVID, and now it's suffering an even worse fate. If your foundations are unsustainable, it will be reflected in the success that you have financially, and this is exactly what is happening.
So sustainability equals profitability from an investor standpoint as well.
There's no doubt about it, and I would argue that it's not only being sustainable, but also going a step further, which is changing the world in a positive way. So it's not the passive sustainability idea that many have, where you do as little damage as you can and you get away with it, but it is creating new models of, creating the new food supply chain, creating a new food system, creating new ways for people to produce that are in harmony with their life and their rights as workers and the products that they produce. And everything has a positive effect. There's no question that investing in an ethical way is more profitable than investing the opposite way.
Well, you know, Sebastiano, I love the humility that you bring to what you do, not just passion, but humility. And for the students that are listening to this podcast, I should tell them that in the 1980s, you became vegan at 15, right? And
vegetarian at 15, vegan.
Vegetarian at 15. But in the 1980s, in the 1980s, Sebastiano, I don't believe you would have been saying what you're saying now about sustainability, being tantamount to profitability, right? Is that a fair statement?
I started saying so in the 1990s, though, and actively doing what I'm preaching. So yeah, it was pretty early. I remember doing some of my first investments in the 1990s, looking for innovative ways to go about food production and other realms that were not very much explored, but it was certainly a pioneering standpoint.
That's absolutely fabulous. So it raises a question about who you are, and it may be a rhetorical question, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. You've got global warming, you've got rising oceans, you've got the barbarism of slaughterhouses, and now you have this monster called COVID, this pandemic. So are you an optimist or a pessimist? Can we get over this hump, over this hurdle, Sebastiano?
I am certainly an optimist, and I'll tell you why. First of all, we have seen changes in the past few years that we had not seen in decades. And this is because the younger generations have more information available, therefore are more aware, and are making choices that change the world. And that's a very positive thing. So please consider just how, all the observers and all the researchers completely missed certain shifts and changes that happened in the past few years, just because they're not looking closely enough. So we've seen a massive change to plant-based consumption, and it's not by chance, it's by choice. Newer generations are more aware of what is happening and want to influence the world through their consumption. Every research institute missed it completely. And I can't even tell you the comments that I received when almost 10 years ago, I invested in Beyond Meat, the people telling me that I was crazy. But this is obviously the direction the world is taking. So change is happening and will happen at faster pace than anyone considers, because the dynamics are very different. It's no longer, it takes, a fact that it takes 10 years for change to take place. Nowadays, change can be very abrupt because information travels at maximum speed. So I am very confident that because of the way new generations choose to consume and behave, but also because the old model is doomed to fail because of its internal contradictions and because it is unsustainable anyway, I am convinced that we will see much bigger changes than we thought were possible in the next few years.
That's great. That's going to give many students and many people hope. Thank you for that.
Well, none of us have a crystal ball. You seem to have an amazing pulse on change and what's going on. What are your thoughts on animal agriculture and whether slaughterhouses will exist in 15 years?
I think that in general, animal agriculture as an economic, as an industry is doomed to fail. How soon that's going to be, I don't know. So there will be still slaughterhouses in 15 years, but the entire model of animal agriculture is already facing a huge crisis and will be in even more of a crisis. One of the tipping elements will be, and this is happening sooner than anyone forecast, the price of non-animal protein is going to be lower than the price of animal protein. I estimate within 2-3 years. And the food industry, which is notoriously, just oblivious to what is healthy or necessary or environmental, will choose based on the cost of ingredients. Once non-animal ingredients are clearly less expensive and deliver as much as animal ingredients, there's no history. The food system will change by itself. Also consider that the animal agriculture industry is doomed to fail because it's based on so many wrong assumptions, including the fact that it keeps offloading its enormous costs onto society. So it takes subsidies, it makes people sick, and then we all pay for healthcare costs. It pollutes the environment, and no one seems to blame it on them. They can't just keep doing that because people are now aware. And we work very closely with some of the most important healthcare institutions in the US and elsewhere. And by all means, they are aware that there's a direct connection between consumption of animal products and problems with health. And nobody wants to carry the cost anymore. Insurance companies, governments, pension funds, and everyone involved in this is saying, why do we have to pay for this and not the industry that causes the problem? So I am pretty optimistic that animal agriculture as a system will fail sooner than anyone forecasts.
I find one of the tactics that proponents of animal agriculture and lobbyists take is to put a negative spin on veganism to the extent that they've referred to veganism as a cult. How would you respond to those sorts of comments?
I can't answer this question because of the secret oath I took. No, I'm kidding. I would say that it is absolutely true. There are people on my side of the fence who go at it completely the wrong way. I think it's perfectly justifiable to be angry and upset about what happens to animals and to feel, how powerless at times, but anyway, to feel very upset at the indifference that the world shows towards so much suffering. At the same time, you will not convince people in an aggressive way. So the way to go about it is to offer better options, offer alternatives, and then bring information in a very gentle way. I assure you, I'm not, and I'm not a moderate. I'm part of some of the organizations that have brought the issue of animals to the forefront in as aggressive a manner as possible. Just think of, what Sea Shepherd does, just putting a ship between, a whaling ship and the whales to protect them. We do that. But at the same time, if you want to convince or make aware a large part of the public about what is wrong with exploiting and mistreating animals, you have to do it in a gentle way. And especially when it comes to food, as you well know, there are so many emotional implications in the way people are used to eat and what is connected to their family history and their habits and their childhood and this and that. It can traumatize people and tell them, I'm going to take, your family history away from you, which is why companies such as Beyond Meat and others that offer the perfect alternative to meat and to the foods that people are used to eat are fundamental. And mind you, the great success of Beyond Meat came because from the very beginning, the main customers of Beyond Meat were by vast majority were meat eaters and not vegans or vegetarians. So offer a better alternative, and then through that explain that there's a possibility of an alternative, and people will come.
You know, that's just to jump on what you said, Sebastiano. It's so true what you said about the Beyond Meat company is a great example. You win people over, don't you, with love, much more than you win them with coercion, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and with the Beyond Meat, you know, I can regale that, you know, my wife and I and our children, you know, we were consumers of Beyond Meat burgers and sausages. Fortunately, having lived in Northern California, we could get them when we wanted them. And so we were consumers long before we were shareholders, but we really believe in the company. And I think they overtly said, and still do, that they're not specifically marketing this product to vegans. And it's quite amazing how many consumers have really discovered the olfactory, you know, similarities, if you will, between, I mean, the food science is incredible. It's just, I personally find it to be incredible.
Did you see the research that came out just a few days ago on numbers about sales of plant-based meat when it's in the meat aisle, sold in the meat aisle, as opposed to being sold in the vegan section of stores? It's a gigantic difference. And one of the things that Beyond Meat did that was fundamental, it was Ethan Brown is an exceptionally smart person. So from the get-go, when he was negotiating with Whole Foods to sell in the first point of sale, he made it a point of wanting to be in a meat aisle, and he only agreed to go with Whole Foods, and they started in Colorado because that was the store that accepted to put them in the meat aisle, immediately saw the success of the product and then expanded it nationally. If he had gone the traditional way, let me hide your product in the vegan section of the market, it would not have happened. So big applause to Ethan Brown.
That's a great point. And so I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, and I'm going to put you on the spot, Sebastiano. You've had so many, you know, what haven't you done as a game changer, really and truly? But I want you to pick one. What's the proudest moment of your career?
I can't pinpoint an exact moment, but I'll tell you what, I take great and humbling pride in being able to sit next to people like Jennifer and to some of the activists that I have the honor to work with. One of the most amazing moments, I would say, is when recently I was asked to join the advisory board for the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, led by Damien Mender, who's one of my all-time heroes and who does a phenomenal job bringing everything together: animal rights, veganism, women rights, and everything that can be done the right way. So that was an amazing moment. But I would say, in general, when I see who I'm sitting next to, as it is today with Jennifer, I'm very happy, and I probably have done something right if I get to meet people like you, Harris, and like Jennifer, and have this conversation.
Wow, I'm so humbled and overwhelmed by what you're saying. I truly am. And you know, the one thing that I surmise we do have in common is that Jennifer Friedman is also my hero. When she, for all those years, Jen's laughing, but it's true. You know, for all of those years, she made a conscious choice, you know, to help those without a voice, namely animals, at a time when she could have pursued a commercial litigation practice or a much more conventional route. And so for all of those years that she was prosecuting cases, and even now in private practice, where she does not take cruelty cases, she has really been a beacon for me too. But Sebastiano, so I know she's gushing, and I certainly am, to hear you speak of us in this way. We're just in awe of what you've done, and that. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you.
No. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but there's so many people that we could mention right now that deserve praise, but it's really learning by their example that we can make a difference. And I'd love to mention my very dear friend, Amy Terkinsky, who spent years and years as a lawyer fighting on the side of animals. And there are exceptional people out there, too many to count, but I'd love to mention at least Camilla Fox of Project Coyote, who is like this crusader who goes by herself and wins battles that no one even dared to imagine fighting. So it's a great community, but the true heroes here are people like Jennifer, because it takes so much courage to stand on the side of the weak and the abused and to fight for them against what everyone else thinks and against anyone's interest and self-sacrificing so much.
Wow. I think what you've done, Sebastiano, is you have, aside from, we're so humbled, by your comments, I have to tell you, but you've snatched my next question from me, I think, which is who inspires you each and every day. And I'm sure you've got a long list.
Oh, yes, but this number one is my wife, Jane, who's my personal hero and an example in every possible way. So when I wake up in the morning, I think of her, and luckily I see her, which gives me a lot of joy, and my two children, my two boys, who are also phenomenal people and give me the strength to do everything I do every single day.
Wow, that's inspiring. That's phenomenal. And I think Jen, you were going to jump in.
I was just before to say thank you so much for the really kind comment. I'm almost speechless from someone of your stature to say something like that. I really appreciate it. And I can think of few people in the plant-based movement who provide such an incredibly positive example as you do. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And so on that note, given this wonderful example that you provide on a daily basis, what advice would you have for students who choose to embark upon a plant-based career?
Very good question. I would say they're making the right choice and that they will have great satisfaction professionally, but I don't want to be generic. I think they're, imagine that we are at a point when the entire food system is changing. So you have a planet of 7.5 billion people who eat every day. And the entire way this system to feed them is constructed is being changed drastically from the roots completely. It's altered in every possible way. And you can choose a career inside the new food system that is being born and being created. And imagine you have 7.5 billion potential clients. It's phenomenal. So to be more specific, I would suggest people who want to embark on a plant-based career, focus on production, focus on how we get these new foods to the tables in sufficient quantity. I would like to share a number with you that explains the situation we're in. From my conversations with the companies that I'm an investor in or that I advise, or from all the research that we do, I estimate that today, without doing anything, 10 to 100 times as many plant-based products could be sold just if they were available. in the supermarket, on the supermarket shelf. So imagine an industry where all you have to do is produce more and everything is sold out. There are very few of the sort. You know, there's the moment of the advent of the smartphone or whatever, but you know, this is a global industry, and you have the potential of multiplying endlessly. So if you choose a career that is at the right point, and I think production in scaling production is really key, then you know you have all the possibilities in the world. Product development is also very interesting because we're rethinking the way food is made and conceived. And so, you know, researchers will also have a lot of work. But just scaling production, number one focus. And anyone choosing a career there, my gosh, they can choose where to go all over the world. Let me just share one thing that I learned today. You're familiar with Singapore, and you know, it's a city and skyscrapers and buildings all over the place. It's an office city. It's very urban. They set out a plan to try and become as food independent as possible. So they want to bring their own food production or control the production to 30%, 35% off their total consumption, and they're barely reaching 5. One of the things they're doing is they're seriously planning to turn some of the skyscrapers into vertical farms. You know, who could have thought that even just 10 years ago? So the world is changing. For students to get into that revolution is the best possible choice, and certainly phenomenal careers ahead.
So that's a nice lead in to my next question, which has to do with what the bottleneck is, right? Why aren't these products getting onto the supermarket shelf? But it goes beyond that. My question really is more about discrimination than supermarkets per se, Sebastiano. Do you feel that vegans are discriminated against, and how, and they face opposition from various places, and by whom, and how can we change that?
Well, there are two aspects to this question. One is there's an obvious resistance by the very powerful industries that are based on exploiting and killing animals. They make a lot of money. They don't want to lose their ground. So they have very powerfully launched negative campaigns about everything that is vegan and everything and all the vegan food in the world. So one example is you see it in every media possible, or almost every. People calling plant-based meat fake meat. It's not fake. It's, you know, it's made of proteins and the other components that animal meat is made of, and it's even healthier, but it's called fake because there's a huge mandate, enormous investments in a PR campaign to paint it in a negative way. As much as we've all read this other falsehood, which is that plant-based meat is hyper-processed. It's not true. You know, the process to produce Beyond Meat is no more complex than making, you know, pasta, fresh pasta at home with a pasta machine, or using a bread machine to knead and cook bread. It's as simple as that. And especially when you compare it to how convoluted and horrifying the process for most of the meat products that are consumed is. Let me throw a number there. 48% of chicken consumption in the US is in the form of chicken nuggets and whatever they're called, strips or things like that. 48%. Now, do we want to discuss about how processed chicken nuggets are? If it's, you know, it baffles the mind. So on one side, the industry wants to hold on to this model where it makes a lot of money at the expense of the planet, the world, the environment, and people's health, and the animals, and wants to keep doing that. On another side, yes, vegans do face discrimination because they're scary. you know, if I sit at a table, if I don't say anything, but I just behave the way I do and I eat what I do, it's challenging for people who don't want their normal habits and you know, and traditions disrupted. They don't want me there. They don't want to know. They don't want any questions asked. They don't want me to talk to their children who are going to ask a question. And so definitely we are discriminated against in many situations, but it's, you know, I'm used to it. I'm in that, I've been in that position for decades now, so it doesn't scare me at all.
It strikes me when you say that you know, when you and I sit and eat a vegan meal, it's like a glass window on a slaughterhouse, right?
Absolutely.
To those
Absolutely.
people. And you know, and I confess to you, because Jennifer and my 3 kids became vegan long before I did. I was the last holdout. I really didn't, I confess that I really didn't understand that until I truly became vegan and you know, then became, you know, the object, you know, of that kind of discomfort. And I have a much better understanding of it now. So thank you for sharing that. That's, you know, that's a real pearl of wisdom for people who, you know, are not in that situation, and for vegans alike. The next question really is a similar question, and it relates to winemakers. And you know, in 2017, I had the privilege of attending the executive wine program at UC Davis. I love wine, and but very few people still really talk about biodynamic, at least in mainstream circles, right? About biodynamic wines. So could winemakers easily adapt, Sebastiano, to true biodynamic winemaking if they wanted to?
Yes. Can I make a distinction first, just to clarify, because biodynamic techniques have several interpretations. Okay, and some are based on animal products, so the use of animal manure and preparations that are based on that. And some, like our approach, do completely away, of course, from animal products and so forth. So could every you know, vine grower and winery adopt biodynamic techniques? By all means, no question. And even before that, could they all be organic? No question at all. We've been organic since 1988. We've never lost a crop. We actually have much better quality production, and the resistance of our plants is measurably better than our far neighbors. Luckily, we don't have anyone next to us spraying. So yes, it's doable very easily. Why don't people do it? Because they're lazy, and it's easy to just stay in the old traditions and not think. And that's a sad fact, but that's how it is.
Not only is your vineyard an award-winning vineyard, but I read somewhere that you created something called green manure. To your point about not using casein and fish bladders, blood, or any other animal derivatives, right?
Can you imagine how absurd it is to use fish bladder to fine or clean your wine? Who you know, in their right mind could ever come up with such a stupid idea? And you know, and by the way, completely unnecessary. And that's what strikes me. You know, it is unnecessary to use pesticides. It is unnecessary to use chemical fertilizers. It is, you know, the paradox that always strikes me is, and you're very familiar with it, I'm sure, because we hear it in agriculture all the time. Farmers spraying fertilizers all over the place. Then what do? There's these so-called invasion of weeds that they didn't want there, and so they use herbicides. So guess what? You spray fertilizers all over the place, and plants start growing randomly, showing the imbalance of your soil. And then you want to kill those plants with herbicides because they bother you. I mean, the entire system is insane. And there's a better way to do it. And you might be interested to know that with the plants that we grow, first of all, there's no such thing as weed, okay? Every plant is a sign of what is going on in your soil, and it's a signal. So if you have a plant that you don't want, guess what? Your fault, because you're doing something wrong, and your soil is just showing you that something is out of balance. But among the plants that we plant, as I mentioned before, 30 to 36 varieties of plants that we plant on purpose on our vineyard, all with phenomenal functions and roles. Guess what? We don't have a single plant that we didn't want or we did not expect to be there because our soil is healthy. So there's no weird, phenomenon of things growing where you don't want them. So it's a matter of making an effort, using your brain, doing some research, and everything can be done, and it's not that hard.
So you're changing, you have changed the face of viticulture. That's amazing, because I think most enophiles, including myself until very recently, would not be aware of the process of winemaking and that things like casein and fish bladders are used, in that process. It's, it's...
You know that they also use ox blood to fine wine? Can you believe that? And it's used in the beer industry. I mean...
You've told me something.
Do you think if people saw it on the label, they would buy the products? By the way, one of the ingredients here or products uses ox blood. Do you think they would buy the wine or the beer? I doubt it.
Right, exactly. Wouldn't be too appealing.
Yeah.
To most, right, to most consumers. So you're a restaurateur too. You're quite the restaurateur. Tell us a little bit, Sebastiano, about your restaurants and what your mission is with your restaurant.
Let me clarify on that though. I'm an investor, and I'm lucky enough to be Matthew Kenney's main partner. Matthew Kenney is this phenomenal chef that opened the path for everyone around the world to be a successful vegan chef, and his creativity knows no bounds. Every important plant-based chef I know in the world at some point was a pupil or followed a course or a class by Matthew Kenney or read a book of his and studied what he does. So I'm not a restaurateur. I'm just a lucky investor who is Matthew's main partner, and I have invested in other food companies. I'm an investor in the Vurger, which is this phenomenal, delicious fast food based in the UK that is mind-blowing because it's as good and healthy as it is successful. It's just wonderful. But I'm more a client of restaurants than a restaurateur.
Right. Yeah, I think you're being very humble, but when you hire chefs, okay, because you're an investor and you're how do I say this? I'll use an awkward phrase. You're an invested investor, in the sense that you're morally invested in this. It goes beyond, investing in a food chain. So, do you have a preference when you are involved in the process of hiring chefs, whether you're deferential or not? Do they have a background with meat? How did they learn?
I'll tell you right away, most of the time, the chefs that turn out to be the most successful plant-based chefs have a past of being traditional chefs. Matthew Kenney himself came through the industry and changed to being plant-based because he had the foresight to make that choice. Right now, we are launching a new project in Boston called Plantable. And the chef there is phenomenal Mary Dumont, who won, I don't know how many awards in her career. She was an Iron Chef and everything else. And she switched to plant-based. And guess what? She's the most phenomenal chef one could ever desire. I think the knowledge of food in a vast way probably gives them the instruments to be phenomenal chef when they try plant-based. which is not to say that, you know, there are chefs who were born plant-based and will always be, and they're fantastic as well. But I've met chefs who have changed over to the plant-based space, and my gosh, their knowledge of flavor and aromas and everything and techniques is unmatched.
That's. Let me just piggyback on your comment, and I know Jennifer has a question as well. But it strikes me that when a chef has that kind of background, where they have been a carnivore for much of their life, or they have been trained that way, they also have an understanding of what flavors people are of olfactory senses in a very different way, right? And my hunch is, just speaking personally, I never believed that I would be anything but a carnivore, to be honest with you. And it was for ethical reasons that I initially begrudgingly became, and not really begrudgingly, but you know, my wife and my hero, you know, influenced me to become vegan, and my young children shamed me in a sense. It was a good thing. It was a very positive transformation, because once I started on a plant-based diet, I realized just how flavorful this food could really be. And so it goes back to something you said earlier. This is really about conditioning, isn't it? And getting people in the mindset, right, Sebastiano?
Absolutely. And you know, my favorite strategy to bring people over to my side of the cause is to serve them a phenomenal dinner. You have no idea how many people have just seen the light because they are served food that they did not expect could be as delicious as it is. Over and over and over and over, this is the best strategy possible.
So before Jennifer asks her question, I will let you know that Jennifer and I are available next Thursday. Come over.
Fantastic. We have a plan to dine together sometime soon when the world,
you know,
so no issue.
It would be beyond an honor, believe me.
My honor.
And
Jennifer.
Thank you. And you've somewhat answered the question already. And whether it's in your communications with a potential new chef or a staff member or a customer, what do you think is the best approach to get that buy-in for the plant-based cuisine for those skeptics, even if they, for instance, are in one of the restaurants?
Well, I think as we were mentioning, you know, bring people in the right way, and by offering them a surprising alternative in a very kind way. And I tell you, if I think of the dinners that we hold and the events that we organize, of course, I've always organized vegan events, and I've never had a complaint from anyone saying, you know, I didn't like the food, or this is, you know, I'm missing this, or I'm lacking that. In fact, quite the opposite. It brings to my mind an event that I held in Hong Kong in 2014. It was centered around a very special art event. And we served, and it was Matthew Kenney organizing, executing at the time. We served a phenomenal vegan feast that was made of one bite food, and we had, I think it was 30 different options that were spread around, and people would go and approach. And we had so many compliments, we didn't know what to do with them. Nobody asked, you know, is this vegan, is this what? We didn't say it. Everybody ate and had the best time of their life. And at the end, we did say, by the way, all you ate was vegan. I think we converted, I don't know how many people in just one evening to the idea that vegan food can be phenomenal. It's very easy.
It reminds me of a story a friend told us. This person is a cardiologist, and they had gone on a marathon, and everybody was very hungry. And he served them actually Beyond Meat, and they said, this is an amazing burger. And after they consumed it and complimented it, he said, well, this is actually not a meat. traditional meat burger.
And
So
then, the surprise effect, but also the satisfaction is incredible. And there are many new products that are absolutely shocking because they're, quite realistic from the standpoint of a meat eater and delicious at the same time from that standpoint. To the point that I have a hard time eating some. I remember my first experience with the Impossible Burger 2.0, which is their current one. It's the first time that I felt the flavor of meat again since I stopped eating it when I was 15. Not to mention, I don't know if you're familiar with Omniport, which is this phenomenal plant-based ground pork meat that was created by David Jung in Hong Kong and is now sold in China and all over the place. It's so realistic that I really can't eat it. It's just way too much. But it makes a lot of people, carnivores happy. They can have the same experience and it's plant-based, no animals involved.
It's amazing that you say that because when Beyond Meat came out with their sausages, or at least when they were made available to consumers, I put my arms up and said, alas, I actually have something that I can pair with a Pinot Noir that has the same olfactory taste and senses. And it's exactly what you're saying. It was a revelation to me, not as someone who had recently transformed to being vegan, but as someone who realized that we could debunk this myth that that you have to have smoked pork with a bottle of Pinot Noir, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So,
and on that note, for your next bottle of Pinot Noir, let me suggest that you give a try to Barvecue, 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 barbecue.com. They're based in North Carolina, and they make the absolute best barbecue pork. Okay, it's all plant-based, of course. It's just stunning. It's so good that I cannot believe it exists. And they over and over, they serve it to people who are thinking that they're having traditional barbecue. And at the end, they compliment them saying it's better than all the other animal-based ones. And it's surprising, but please do try it with your next fantastic bottle of wine. And I think you won't be disappointed.
We absolutely will, and I surmise that next bottle of wine will be one of yours. But apart and aside from which, investees. So Barvecue, I think, is one of your investee companies, Sebastiano. What else do you invest in currently? Let's put our investor hat on and tell us what you're investing in.
Well, there are many, numerous companies because I'm an investor in the plant-based space in over 50 different companies. So there's a great variety. I invest in people first and foremost. Team is what matters. So you find founders with great ideas about products and especially with good ethics, and then you're in good shape. So when I invested in Beyond Meat, which is almost 10 years ago, I invested in Ethan Brown and his team. I saw how he was behaving with his team and how he was treating people one by one, and I was blown away. I thought this person is very smart, obviously has phenomenal ideas, but the respect with which he treats everyone around him is what I was looking for. And sure enough, that proved to be the case. Very successful companies are based on excellent people who respect everyone around them. And so you really, so we invest in people. And of course, when they have great ideas and great products, it's a fantastic opportunity, and we know how to look for that. So the possibilities are endless. We invest in technologies that innovate by eliminating animals from scientific testing, for instance. So we invest obviously in food companies that replace animals directly, but we also have invested in new materials and new technologies that replace animals in general, or that anyway make it so that they can be taken out of the production equation in every possible way, as food or as resource in general.
Well, what you said about investing in people is also such a great reflection upon you, Sebastiano. It just speaks volumes about who you are. You're not just a guy who's changing the planet, I mean, literally, but you're investing in people, and I love hearing that. And it's so true, right? I mean, I've heard other investors, purpose-driven investors, say those things, but you really do walk the talk in so many respects. And that brings me to a question, which is maybe the flip side of this coin, which is about lawmakers and regulators, and not to disparage them. But I've heard, some of the things that you have to say about the EU lawmakers, for example. And you were talking about, I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, that 20% of the EU budget goes into meat and dairy industry subsidies.
That's correct. That's a research that Greenpeace did that showed that 20% of the entire EU budget, not the agricultural budget, but the entire budget, goes into subsidies to the dairy and meat industry. Of course, unbeknownst to taxpayers who probably would not want to be subsidizing a failing industry like that. So what I think of lawmakers and regulators, that they will have to adapt to the change, and the change will come from the bottom up. It's not going to come from there. And as it always is, I think how the world was analyzed once as in terms of class struggle between, rich and poor, capitalist and proletarian. The real class struggle today is between bureaucrats and those who want to do things. This is the real fight. And bureaucrats will always stand in the way of people who want to change or do things, and change makers will have to fight the battle and win, and we will. But that's the way I see it. Unfortunately, it's just a gigantic obstacle. You are familiar with the fact that the European Commission has temporarily agreed on banning the words meat and sausage and burger and hot dog and so forth from all European packaging for plant-based products. So they're in the process of approving a norm that would make people call vegan burgers would be called discs, and the vegan sausages would be called tubes. Now you imagine, if it's not an imbecile mind that comes up with these things, it's obviously a corrupt mind, because I don't see any other alternative. The people who propose this are completely stupid, or they are completely corrupt, which is probably the right explanation.
So do you, just before, and I know Jennifer had another question as well, but do you see lobbyists at play here? Is that what's happening?
Oh, absolutely, of course. I mean, the amount of money that the meat and dairy industry spend lobbying is unbelievable. Think of it, European Union, 20% of the budget is gifts to an industry that would fail the very next day unless it were supported by these subsidies. It would not exist. It would just go bankrupt immediately, as it's doing anyway, despite all the support. But it would immediately disappear because it makes no financial sense, no economic sense, makes no environmental sense. It doesn't make sense in any possible way. But definitely very, I once looked at the numbers that the meat industry and dairy industry invest in lobbying. You would be shocked. You could possibly feed and educate millions of people around the world with the money they waste ruining the planet and our lives.
Here in North America, for sure, as well.
Oh yeah, in Europe as well, rest assured.
It seems though that lobbyists are dealing with a challenge, as we all are, with this pandemic, with COVID, and in particular, there's a lot of supply chain issues related to closures because of outbreaks. And so what are your thoughts on how this has affected the rise of plant-based meats and whether in general that will mean a shift in the paradigm of what people consider food moving forward?
There are two points of view there that are equally important. One is, and we have to remind everyone we talk to every day, this pandemic came because some people think it makes sense to eat animals. So it came from a wet market, it came through animals, like many of the previous epidemics. But let's never forget that this gigantic disaster we're in came about because people think it makes sense to raise, kill, torture, slaughter, and sell in markets and keep in horrible conditions animals, which of course is absurd as a thought. We would never be there if it were not for wrong habits that haven't been thought about. So having said that, despite the fact that the media and the industry are spending enormous amounts of money to hide this fact, because you will see, as I see, that we talk about COVID 24 hours a day, and nobody talks about what brought it about. The vaccine, the cure, the distancing, the this and that. Hello, it happened because people eat animals and sell them in markets. That's why. And nobody wants to talk about that. But despite the fact that this is kept away from the public and from public discourse, consumers' habits are changing very rapidly, and we see a meteoric rise of plant-based consumption because people are thinking, wait a second, maybe meat is not that healthy, maybe it's not that safe. By all means, you know, it's a way of transmission of many diseases, not only of COVID, but, you know, it's a way of transmission of several diseases anyway. Then there's the other point of view, which is the meat industry showed its complete disregard for life, as it always does, when we could see, and they're trying to hide it, of course, but we could see how it treated its workers, exposing them to contagion knowingly and in complete disregard of their life, of their safety, of their health, of their families. And the most important clusters of infection in the US were in slaughterhouses and meat processing plants, the largest clusters of infection. Let's not forget that. And the people who ran those plants and run those plants were absolutely aware of what they were doing. They completely ignore the well-being of their workers, as they always do. Let's not forget, that's the industry with the highest incidence of accidents at work, okay? Let's not forget that the highest incidence of any industry at all is in a meat packing industry and in the slaughterhouses. So, by the way, the dairy industry is notoriously the highest employer of illegal migrants, as they're called. And so no big surprise that the same, you know, these industries showed complete disregard for their workers and caused deaths and infections and devastation, as they always do. So the relationship between COVID and meat is very clear. It is the cause. It is the cause of clusters of infection. It is a cause of all the health problems, by the way, that make people more susceptible to worse cases of COVID as well: obesity, high blood pressure, and all the other, diseases that come from eating animal products. So the relationship is obvious, but it's our duty to make more people aware of this. So I suggest to everyone, every time you start a conversation about COVID, say, by the way, do you remember that this came from animals and it happened because people eat animals? Don't forget that. And let's go on with the conversation about what's next, what's going to cure it, what's going to save us, blah, blah. But let's never forget, at the beginning of each conversation, remind people where it came from, because they tend to forget.
I'm going to ask you one final question, which is, again, ripping off a page from the great Dan Rather. What's the one question that I haven't asked you, or that we haven't asked you, that you wished we had, and what's the answer to that question?
That's a very good question, and off the top of my mind, I would say maybe, let's see, you could have asked me what is the most exciting revolution that I've seen happening in the food world that is going to shape the future. And we have been exploring in the past few months and weeks companies that create proteins from air and from other sources that you would not imagine. So there are already technologies that take hydrogen and take CO2 and a culture of bacteria and create full proteins, the most nutritious kind, that can create all the foods that we want. So imagine, and some of these companies are concentrating on using renewable energies for this. So renewable energy, air, bacteria, and you create food, infinite amounts of food with zero waste, zero pollution, and using zero resources in terms of water and land, or near zero. So the future is bright. People are working on phenomenal things, and this will shape the future of food much earlier than anyone is thinking. So I have tried and seen products, meat analogs, and how would I call it? Air-based cheese made by these technologies, and it's not only there, it's delicious as well.
That's amazing. Sebastiano, the pleasure was entirely ours to be able to host you this morning. We're really humbled and honored, and I wish I did have another 2 hours with you today. And I also want to thank Jennifer, not only for putting up with me for 22 years or so, but for co-moderating this morning. Thanks again, and this will be up on the Career Path site shortly.
Thank you very much, Harrison, Jennifer, and again, Jennifer, thank you for your example. It's fundamental, especially for young people, to think of dedicating their energies and life to make this a better world with self-sacrifice, and you're the best example I can think of for this.
Thank you so much. The pleasure has been all mine. Truly appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing all the amazing things you'll continue to do in the future.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
Sebastiano.
Thank you.